Week 77 of Santa Barbara. Welcome to week 77 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We finished episode 371, originally aired Monday, January 13th, 1986. Last time we had discussed some things such as Santana's age, and it turns out she was 16 when Brandon was born. Mm-hmm. So 9 years ago, sorry, that's not right, not when Brandon was born. She was... however old, anyway, she was 16 9 years ago when Cruz and her went on that double date. And she's 25 now. So she was 19 when Brandon was born. 18 or 19, I guess. Brandon's 7 now. The other thing we had a question about was 911. Mm-hmm. California statewide system initially launched in 1972, but wasn't fully completed until 1985. So... looks like 911 was a fully operational thing in California at the time of this episode. All right. Cruz and Santana are listening to James Taylor on the beach, and they talk about Eden. We actually had to search a little bit to find a version of this episode that had the James Taylor music, because the first version that we found had the entire first scene dubbed over with random music, including, of course, the dialogue, to avoid the copyright bots on YouTube. And then another version we had the first scene completely blanked out with no audio. But the third version we found had not only the dialogue, but also the James Taylor version. So that's a keeper, I guess.
And I'm not a sound engineer at all, but I imagine if you were going to try to somehow block out or blur the music and keep the dialogue, you'd have to have separate sort of soundtracks for that, would you?
Well, they can unpick it, because we just, for my birthday, I got Evil of the Daleks, the animated story. And of course, in episode 2, they go to the Tricolor Bar, which has the Beatles 8 days a week playing in the background. And it did not have that in the animated version. So either they completely cut 2.5 minutes of dialogue, or they were able to use instruments to separate the dialogue from the music, and then they put over some music that they could get the rights to. So I think it's possible, but one of the problems is that tape doesn't always run at a consistent speed, and so as you're playing back, the tape's either getting slower or speeding up or stretching. So it's hard to write an algorithm that will consistently just pick out a beat, because it's stretching as the episode goes along. Mason regains consciousness, says into the phone, "Poison!" He tries to get into Cece's room, but of course it's locked and he collapses. Eden, of course, is in Lake Tahoe on the other end of the phone. She calls the Santa Barbara police and tells them to send Cruz Castillo to 300 Park Lane. Later, Kirk wonders why Cruz, and she says, oh, well, he knows the family. They check out of the hotel. Eden drives them back to the airport, and then Eden flies the jet back to Santa Barbara. And Kirk is a little annoyed because she's doing all the driving. Mm-hmm. He says, You drove the car here, you're driving the jet, but the only thing I was able to do was pack your bags. So this is a theme that is happening that I think will culminate in the new year with some events that I recall happening. So this will be interesting.
It's kind of an interesting thing for him to be focusing on in the middle of this crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, this whole thing about being Mr. Eden Capwell is just really not sitting with him, which is odd, because he's probably just marrying her for her money, so why does he care?
Yeah, when you think about it, and he put so much energy into wooing her, and spent all that on flowers and all of this stuff when they first met. And I think the whole prize was that she was Eden Capwell. So it seems strange that he's alarmed by it now.
At the Capwell house, Mary and Mark arrive. They are not aware that anything is wrong upstairs, so they're just hanging out downstairs. Janice arrives and tells them that she thinks something's off with Mason because of the weird call she got from Mason's secretary. Mary says, nope, there's nothing wrong. La, 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 la. Eventually, though, they do find Mason unconscious upstairs. Mary smells the lighter fluid in Mason's food and realizes he's been poisoned. Cruz arrives, and Mary tells him that someone is trying to hurt Cece, because this whole time no one's been able to get into Cece's room, which is where Gina is with her syringe, and she's about to inject it into Cece's arm when he grabs her wrist. And not only is he strong enough to do that, he's strong enough to turn the needle around and try to inject it into her. And she basically, her defense is, I was just trying to follow your wishes. And Cece tells her that he's been conscious for days. So not weeks, as could have been possible. But he has been overhearing some interesting things. And he wants to keep it a secret. He tells her he'll send her away for attempted murder if she tells anyone. Now, this is a very interesting thing, because it's not clear if Cece knows she pulled the plug. He may just know that he tried to inject her. And it's obviously not clear to Gina which of the two things he's talking about. So she is obviously frightened. And he tells her she's going to carry out his plans for him while he continues to pretend to be unconscious. And I think she jumps into line pretty quickly, because she obviously thinks that maybe Cece knows that she pulled the plug.
Yeah, so really the power dynamics in this whole situation flip pretty decisively in this episode. And I was sort of wondering how much it really matters if he knows she tried to pull the plug, since he already knows she did try to kill him in this episode.
Well, I think somehow she could hand wave away the injection, or I think she wouldn't get as much time for the attempted injection, because plug pulling was something that actually she succeeded at, right? Plus all the framings and things.
Well, that's true, and I mean it definitely has implications for Eden and Kirk as well. But yeah, I mean he does have her. He's literally caught her red-handed trying to kill him today.
So what do you think of our new Cece? In just that one scene, he pretty much showed us how he's going to be.
Yeah, he's got a lot more vitality, I think, than any of our other CCs, and is a forceful personality. So I'm already really enjoying this CC.
I mean, it's a lot like when Doctor Who regenerates, and this is like Tom Baker leaping up from the floor and starting to talk about dinosaurs and taking charge right away.
Maybe CC is a Time Lord.
Gina tries to argue with him about, how he's really at fault for everything that happens. He says, no, you and Mason befouled this house. Gina says, you never wanted me, I loved you. Cece realizes people are going to get into that room pretty soon and has her smooth the blankets. Cece has her smooth the blankets so that whoever might burst in will not see that he has moved. And Cruz breaks down the door, and everything seems fine, other than the fact that Gina's there. She's hiding the syringe at this point. And he suspects that Gina poisoned Mason so that she could get access to Cece, and Gina storms out in a huff and manages to toss the needle into Mark's bag, which is once again, thanks to him having treated Mason, right next to the door. So she gets rid of that syringe, although I'm thinking Mark might possibly notice that there's a syringe full of liquid now in his bag.
Yeah, I think all it would take would be for him to reach in and be poked with a syringe full of stuff to realize someone's tampered with his bag.
So I don't know, this could be a fun thing of Gina doing Cece's bidding while he's pretending to be unconscious. It's not clear, what he's heard over the past days or who he trusts and doesn't trust. I mean, everything Kirk said to him or in the room, I don't think would lead him to be suspicious of Kirk, unless he was aware of all the weird skulking around Kirk did, or maybe in that conversation with Gina that one time that was in Cece's room. So maybe he knows that Kirk suspects Gina and wonders why hasn't Kirk come forward to clear Eden.
Yeah, we don't really know what Cece knows. We don't know quite what time period he was awake for. And we don't know the context. Was he fully awake for that time? He's just been lying there. Sounds like an incredibly difficult thing to maintain. Or has he been kind of going in and out of consciousness a little bit? So what has he put together? And will he put it together right?
Cruz tells Janice what's going on upstairs, and she runs up to see Mason. And she tells Mason about that call she got from his secretary, and he says that wasn't my secretary, so I think he suspects Gina too. She also took a message for him while down there, which may be something that will be happening in the future. She says that Carl Vanderbilt called and you're in business. Now, this is obviously something that will be happening in the future. I don't know if this is some money he's borrowed in order to invest in that casino, or if this is a different scheme of Mason's that we're not aware of, or if it's something to do with him trying to get control of Capital Enterprises. So it'll be interesting to see what it is. Hopefully it's something fun.
Or another thought I had was that this may actually even tie in to whatever he was scheming with his mother at one point.
Janice warned Mason that Mark has a bad temper. Now this we kind of suspected, I think. We suspected that he seemed dodgy right from the beginning. Mason goes on to tell Mary, but she says Mark is one of the most even-tempered people she knows. So I think maybe something is going to happen with Mark.
I think so too, and we know just how good a judge of character Mary is, when it comes to her blindness towards Steve and her blindness towards Gina and on and on.
Ted.
So, yeah.
Cruz questions Gina downstairs now, and she tries to turn it on Eden, saying that Eden is trying to make her look bad with all these things that she's being accused of. She's crying throughout this interrogation, and Cruz says, "Those are real tears, aren't they? You're a beautiful woman." Now, I don't know what that was about. I don't know if he's trying to get on her good side, or he's trying to have a backup in case Santana doesn't work out, or he's trying to seduce Gina so she'll confess. I don't know what that was about.
I was assuming it was a questioning technique, that he's trying to show empathy for her, and that was the only way I could think of.
Well, of course, she doesn't give anything up, so she keeps trying to escape from that interrogation. Kirk and Eden arrive, and they talk to Mason in Cece's room. Mason says, it's time to do something to stop Gina. And Mason says at one point that Kirk and Eden are no help, and Kirk tells him that Eden dropped everything in Lake Tahoe to rush to Santa Barbara to save him. So he kind of blows that off, actually, and continues on saying, Capital Enterprises lost money for the first quarter ever. And then Eden says, well, if you've got some master plan, I'd like to hear it. And he says, oh yeah, I have one. Dad would love this plan. It's a perfect plan. And then when they leave, Cece opens his eyes, so we all know that he heard that. So it's interesting that he's kind of like Succession, watching his kids fight over control of his company and just letting it happen.
Yeah.
Eden asks Cruz if Santana is waiting for him, and he says, does it matter? And then we see Eden rereading, I think, the same letter she wrote Cruz last time, unless she wrote a new one and is rereading it to herself. I didn't necessarily recognize the words in it. Then Kirk manages to find Gina alone and says that he saw her take the syringe yesterday. And she freaks out. And then he says, and this isn't the first time you've tried to kill Cece. He says, think about that for a while. Then we'll talk. So now, both Cece and Kirk are going to be giving Gina orders that she'll be following, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. She'll be wishing she hadn't come back from Las Vegas at this point.
Mm-hmm. She did book that flight to Brazil. Maybe she could just leave town in hopes that Cece doesn't have any grasp on her. Although there's Brandon. So she ends up escaping to Cece's room, and he's angry that she's been gone so long. But she said, well, people are trying to question me about everything. So he tells her he wants her to gather his entire family into the room and just let them hang out there for a while and chat so he can eavesdrop on everyone. He says, time to find out who my friends are.
Wow. You know, one of the things I enjoyed about this episode, because I don't think we've seen it very much, if ever, is that this was an episode where everyone was actually very concerned about Mason's health. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Eden actually has this conversation with Kirk on the way back to Santa Barbara, where she says, well, you know, he's my brother. I'm going to be concerned about him, even though I disagree with him most of the time. Mm-hmm. And to me, that was just a really nice kind of change, that we see Eden and Janice and Mary and even Mark, although he and Mason don't get along at all, and Cruz all being really concerned about what has happened to Mason. And we see this a lot with Kelly. People always trying to rescue her from something, but I don't think we've seen it with Mason before.
Mm-hmm. A little bit of parallel to, I guess, the last episode of Succession of the season, where I won't spoil it, but Shiv and Roman are a bit worried about something that happened to Kendall in the previous episode. So, and it shows that they will rally around their hated brother before, anyone else. So. That's it for this episode. So we'll be back after we watch Tuesday, January 14th, episode 372 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
No, well, ever since we got that call, I mean, you haven't let me do one thing except pack the bags, but you have, what, drive the car, fly the plane, make the call to the police?
Well, maybe I've got to do something. I've got to take control of things because it makes me feel better. Is there anything wrong with that?
Welcome back.
Hello.
We have watched episode 372 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Tuesday, January 14th, 1986. And since we last did one of these, Betty White passed away. She's a future, let's say, guest star in a couple of episodes in a few years.
And we did see some clips from her appearances on Santa Barbara, as part of all of the many tributes that came pouring in.
And we ended up finishing season 6 of Mary Tyler Moore, which had 4 Suen episodes on that last disc. Give us an excuse to try and catch up on the many hours of DVDs that we have that we've never watched. So. And we also saw Janice Page on something. I can't figure out what it was. It was either Policewoman or Burke's Law or I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it was Burke's Law.
Breakfast at the Wicker Table. Mason, Ted, Kirk, and Gina. A lovely family meal. And a gray-haired woman was serving them. So I'm not sure which of their many employees that is. Mason asks Gina to pass the preserves and says, maybe I'd better have you taste them first. Mason says to Kirk, it's like having breakfast with the Borgias. And then Kirk gets a little defensive of Gina by saying, unless you can prove something, Mason, I don't think you should come up. I don't think you should be passing around these accusations. So I think Gina was a little surprised that Kirk was sticking up for her. I think it's part of his plan to get her into a little axis of evil.
Yeah, I think any kind of interaction between Kirk and Gina is probably going to be very strategic and transactional on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Cece phones Gina on that special way that they have of being able to phone another phone in the house, what we've seen before, and tells her to come right up. And he gives Gina the list of people he wants to have paraded through his room so he can eavesdrop on them. And the first, of course, is Sophia. Now, Gina says, oh, I can actually see the guest house from here, and which we know is true, because Ted and Sophia saw Eden and Kirk climbing out the window, or Gina. And Lionel's in there right now. You know, they've been seeing a lot of each other, and Augusta and Lionel are basically divorced at this point. So she's laying. I guess her plan is the more Cece can be angry at Sophia, maybe he won't have as much anger to spare for her.
Mm-hmm.
Cece says that he doesn't trust her version of things, so he's taking in everything Gina says, but he's probably assuming she's spinning it all.
Mm-hmm.
Lionel has given Sophia the painting. And he gives her some pearls because he needs her friendship right now.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in a very friendship mode based on all their actions and talk. Gina arrives, and the story she's come up with to lure Sophia up there is to say that Cece's doctor needs to see Sophia immediately in Cece's room.
Mm-hmm.
So Cece and Lionel go up there, much to Gina's delight.
Sophia and Lionel. Cece's already there.
Sorry, Sophia and Lionel go up there, much to Gina's delight that Lionel has tagged along, because that actually makes things better for her plans. And at that point, while Cece is listening in, Sophia tries to give Lionel back the pearls. And their dialogue is very, as you might expect, in, let's say, what's the word? Non-specific. And he says, what we have is very important to me. Sophia says, all right, I guess we wasted too much time over the years. So, of course, they're talking about this friendship they were just discussing. But it sounds to Cece like they definitely are having an affair again. And then they talk about how Brick is their son. And what's surprising to me is that Cece doesn't then subsequently ask Gina, what's all this about Brick being Sophia and Lionel's son? But Cece's, while he's using Gina, for his work, he's not using her as a sounding board or anything. He's just taking everything in.
It's really interesting to think, we've been thinking about this whole storyline with Brick and who was going to find out when. And it's sort of interesting that Cece is actually one of the first people to find out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We never would have guessed that. Kirk suggests to Gina that they join forces. And she says, to do what? And he says, all kinds of things to do with the Capwells. So this, as we were predicting, might be a fun, possibly Bonnie and Clyde situation going on here.
These are just the kind of people you want to marry into your family.
Kirk tells Gina he found her half-burned diary. And then Gina says that she's got him just as much as he's got her, because she realizes, putting everything together, she tells him she was watching him from the closet when he carried Eden out the window, and basically, you've obviously made Eden think that she pulled the plug, and that's how you tricked her into marrying you. So I think Kirk seems a bit taken aback that Gina put all that together very quickly. But I think, as long as they've got something on each other, I think, his plan will still work. But I didn't think he was expecting that.
Well, they were all there together in that little room, so...
Mm-hmm. Kelly tells Nick she wants to set a wedding date. February! So we'll have a February Sweeps wedding. Maybe it'll be one of those wedding parties / grand opening of the casino parties. She wants Sophia to give her away, Mason Ted as ushers, and Dylan is the best man. Kelly has Dylan meet her at the Capwell house. And she tells Mason and Ted, and then just as Rosa is fitting her dress, Dylan shows up, and she tells him the news, but Mason's actually already spilled it to him by that point. Nick arrives, and she says she told Dylan. And he says, "Did he see you in that dress?" And she said, "Just for a minute." I don't think Nick was too happy about that for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know. Dylan's his usual sulky self this episode. I'm sort of wondering if they'll do like a graduate thing at the wedding where she gets to the altar and is just about to say yes, and then Dylan comes bursting in to take her away. Obviously, that would be horrifying for those of us who aren't shipping Dylan and Kelly, but it'll be interesting to see how they play out the wedding.
Warren visits Brick, and contrary to what I previously said that they get along well, they don't get along well at all. He is very angry at Brick, spreading the news all over town that he is Lionel and Sophia's son. And he accuses Brick of angling for an inheritance. Warren visits Sophia and says that he told Brick to stop shooting his mouth off. Of course, Lionel is there at the same time. So Lionel says to him, "I have another son. Can't we all just adjust to that?"
It'll be interesting to see how Augusta adjusts to that. I'm hoping that Julia will be a bit of a moderating force here, because she is friends with Brick and Amy, and knows that he's been searching for this mystery for a while, so she would know that he's not really angling for anything.
Exactly.
Not that, I mean, it was Minx who brought him there, so in many ways he's sort of the opposite of Kirk.
He could have said to Warren, "Well, thanks to me, there is an inheritance to have."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad Warren was told off screen. That's one of the things I was looking forward to see the various people being told. So, the episode starts with Warren already knowing. Mason tells Ted that he's pulled off a major business coup. He doesn't want Kirk to overhear it, so they end up in Cece's room. And Mason gives Ted a legal document to read through, and Ted is very impressed by the contents. And Mason says, "Well, can I count on your vote?" And he says, "Well, I gave my word to Eden, but I'll think about it." So it must be something extremely major. I think Mason actually says Dad will be very happy. But, trying to think back, 35 years, I don't remember what this is. So I'll be interested to see what it is.
Well, it might be another one of those things like we had all that time ago with the Amanda Lockridge and this incredible mystery in that Chinese box or whatever it was. And it was just a diamond that they shattered the next episode, and that was that. So.
Yeah, maybe that's why it doesn't ring much of a bell for me. Of course, he's listening to all this. So he tells, after seeing Sophia, he tells Gina to bring Mason in next, and Gina calls Mason up there and takes the opportunity to put a little spin on something that Cece's probably been grumbling over for a few months, and makes it seem like the only reason she was in bed with Mason is that Mason raped her. And I really doubt that Cece is buying this, but of course Mason's confused by the whole thing, and that must sort of come over a little bit in the dialogue that Cece hears. He says, "What, are you recording this? What are you hoping to get from this?" So, that's, something Gina tried, but I doubt it's gone anywhere. Mason then invites her to a cocktail party tomorrow at 7, saying he's going to have a major announcement. So this must be to do with his legal document, and he's going to tell the family what coup he's pulled off.
Now, it is worth remembering. I mean, obviously he did not rape Gina, and we've seen that whole storyline. But it is worth remembering that way back at the beginning of the series, I think when they were still fleshing out the characters a little bit, he did actually get quite close with Santana. And was, at that point, they were, I think, trying him out as a much more villainous sort of character, because I remember around that time Rosa was saying, well, he's always been, there's always been something bad about him. And then they kind of found their footing with him. But
and there was that time Cece walked in on Mason in Gina's room while she was in her nightgown. So he always thought that Mason was trying to rape Gina at that point too. So maybe he's, who knows how muddled his mind is after being in the coma for 3 months, but he doesn't seem muddled. But we'll see. We'll see what he takes from all these hidden meetings that he's listening in on.
My sense is that, he obviously, I don't think will trust Gina or take anything she says at face value, because he has already caught her trying to kill him. But I don't think any of these conversations will necessarily make him any more trustful of the other people in his life either.
So Mason tells Gina black tie, cocktails at 7, and when Mason leaves, Gina asks if he heard that. He said, "Oh yeah, just make sure my tuxedo is pressed." So I think we'll be seeing Cece out of his bed tomorrow, and he'll crash Mason's party and perhaps overturn everyone's plans.
And it'll be really nice to see a up and running CC, because as we've already mentioned, this iteration of CC, which is the final iteration, is much more vigorous and, has a lot more sort of energy and dynamism than the other versions we've seen. So obviously this is, I think, going to be a much more active CC.
Yeah, my theory was that they were trying to soften CC by casting Jed Allen because he's so likable. But they haven't actually done it with any of the actions or dialogue. I mean, this could very easily have been Paul Burke or any of the other ones. But I think they're just relying on the fact that Jed Allen on his own is so likable that they can make CC just as nasty as he's always been. But just by who's playing him, he might come off as likable. It's an interesting thought. All right, that is it for the Tuesday episode. So we'll be back after we watch episode 373 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Your mother's the housekeeper here. Why didn't she teach you to use the back entrance?
You waste a lot of energy hating people, Gina.
You're just not fair to me, Cece.
Oh, Gina, you were never so morally outraged as when somebody sees you for what you are. Mason's party's still on for tomorrow night?
Well, yes, as far as I know.
Good. That's when I will change all their lives. Forever.
Welcome back!
Hello.
We finished episode 373 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Wednesday, January 15th, 1986. I remembered where we saw Janice Page. It wasn't actually Burke's Law. It was Mary Tyler Moore. Remember we were watching this Betty White once? She was the one who had that date with Lou. Santana decorates the beach house, finally, after months of her having promised to do that.
Yeah.
And tells Cruz she has a plan to get Brandon away from Gina. She won't tell him what it is, just that it's nothing illegal.
And I think he already senses that whatever her plan is, it will involve some ugliness, at least.
Yeah, I don't know what... she's never been as scheming as Gina, so I don't know what she's concocting. But if it's as lame as her previous plans, I don't think she's ever going to get Brandon.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll chat later, I think, about some of the interactions we see on here, but I would say Santana's definitely not in the same league as some of the other characters when it comes to scheming and, finding nefarious ways to get what they want.
I mean, based on what she does next, I feel like she doesn't really have a plan, because she, goes to the Capwells under the pretense of having a Christmas gift for Brandon. And of course, Gina tries to stop him, but he helps her get past. And then, as soon as she's upstairs, she sneaks into Gina's room and just starts looking around for stuff. And doesn't appear to have any particular thing she's looking for, but she ends up finding the script for the Alta Vista sedan commercial, which, as we remember, is where we saw the professor from Gilligan's Island come for the audition. Odd that Gina would keep that, but and not burn it with the rest of the stuff that was in the bear. But on the face of it, it doesn't seem too much evidence. But Santana cleverly hides it. But in the end, Gina discovers her and can't convince anyone to search Santana, even her purse. so she needn't have hidden it quite as well. And she shows the script to Cruz, and he reads it aloud, and there are all those weird lines about "let me die" and things, so it does seem odd to them, plus the fact that neither of them has ever heard of an Alta Vista sedan.
Yeah, I mean, it is weird, definitely. I wouldn't say it's really conclusive in any way.
No.
You think about it, it could be a lot of things. We know what it is, of course, but I can, and I'm certainly not as nefarious and scheming as Gina, but I could think of many ways that it could be passed off without really it amounting to anything.
And really no one really knows anything about the tape in the room, unless Cece remembers. So the only other thing it could be related to is when she played the tape for Eden over the phone that one time. And Eden dropped did Eden drop the phone before she could hear it, though?
Yes.
So...
yeah, that's right, because Eden dropped her earring.
So that couldn't be it. Oh, but maybe she told Cruz that, she heard her dad's voice in her head when she came in. I can't even remember if she ever mentioned that, because it would make her seem crazy. But I think Eden would have to see the script, and somehow the words would have to trigger something in her. But I think the best bet of Cruz solving this crime is for Kirk to someday present him with all the evidence in a bag.
Yeah. I was actually, having said that, though, I was almost kind of happy that it came up, because I'd been feeling like, we know that the whole reason why Eden married Kirk was because he, is presenting himself as his protector against any charges of this attempted murder of CC. So that's a huge thing. But apart from that, I almost have been feeling like that part of the story's being kind of buried a little bit under all the subsequent attempts to poison Mason and to kill Cece again, and all the other revelations we've seen around, Brick and so on. And so, in a way, it was kind of nice to have our attention brought back to that.
Now, we were told a few weeks ago that someone new was on the case, but we don't even know who that is, and they've never shown up at the house with a magnifying glass or anything. So, unless they've been examining paint fragments from that windowsill since Halloween, I don't know who at the police station is actually moving forward on this investigation. In the study, Mason and a mystery man are signing documents. This is a shocker. I don't remember this storyline at all. Just from his hands, he appeared to be, kind of an old white guy, probably in his 50s. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of feel like they were just, not really showing his identity because, this is a very incidental character who we may never see again. But I'm actually hoping it's something more interesting than that. I'm hoping they're hiding the identity for a reason that might actually have story implications. So,
well, it just seemed right away to me like they were hiding the identity. And for some reason, the weird idea popped into my head, oh, what if that's Lionel? But of course, that doesn't make any sense. Mason would never, have anything to do with Lionel, and it doesn't make sense for the plot. But we don't really know any other characters that it could be. So if there's a big reveal, it might be a character we don't know, but that other people would recognize. But Mason managed to get him in and out of the study without anyone else noticing, because for the whole episode, a whole bunch of people are trying to find out what Mason's plan is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it can't be Marcello, who is safely in prison as far as we know, and why would he be working with Mason?
Well, Mason says, together, you and I will control an empire bigger than anyone ever dreamed of. So...
I mean, Marcello would actually be a good candidate from that point of view.
Yeah, unless it's maybe he's brought over another Armonte that we don't know about, that Sophia's never mentioned. She doesn't seem to be doing too much Armonte board work. Maybe because there was already a merger in place or went through with Armonte, it would have made sense for Mason to try to get someone from that side of the company on board. Something like that. Maybe Armonte Industries is massive.
Yeah, maybe there's other siblings involved.
It could be meeting another Riker at some point, although Marcello was an orphan, so he didn't seem to have any aunts and uncles to take him in after the war. But then again, it sounded like maybe he got separated, and even if he had in a different city, he might not have ended up with them
Might
because
be
of the
blood
way.
relatives of the Count who, are more distant.
But yeah, that's the only other company I can think of maybe that could be interested, unless we've forgotten something. It wasn't Ginger.
Well, another possibility, but we're not in any way at that point with this storyline, would be if Mason actually knew that Brick was a Lockridge, and things had gotten far enough along in that story where Brick had some control over Lockridge assets, then that would perhaps be another way. But obviously,
I always got a feeling the Lockridges
it.
weren't as well off as the Cap was.
No.
And plus, not even counting all of Lionel's plundering of the assets, which most of them aren't aware of even yet. And, artwork isn't really something that a corporation is built on. So maybe there's someone else that we've heard of before that we've forgotten about, or it's a totally new thing. And it may just be that they hadn't cast the actor yet, and therefore they're just showing the hands, just like all those weeks CC was Nakoma when they just showed a hand. Because they're actually going to hire someone to portray a character that we either know or have heard of off screen, but I can't really think of anyone that could be.
Now, unless someone like Stockman came back from the dead, but CC controls all his assets, so it couldn't be that either.
Yeah, maybe a brother of Stockman that technically has a legal right to some of the things, and Mason's promised, to reimburse him for all that CC plundered something.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ted, who's the only one who seems to know about it, they seems to think it's a great idea, so it's not really sounding like it's a dodgy scheme. Mason reveals to Mary that he overheard her say she loves him while he was sick, and she says she was lying, but of course he doesn't buy that. And he invites her to the party tomorrow, and by the end of the episode she agrees to go, but mainly because Ted talks her into it. Ted Talk. Oh, here's some Succession level shenanigans happening. Eden tries to get Ted to tell her what Mason's plan is. Shiv tries to get Greg to tell her what Roman's plan is. But he says he's been sworn to secrecy. And then she says, well, he doesn't have the votes unless you're going to vote, against me. And he says he hasn't decided yet. So this is the first inkling Eden has that things may not go her way tomorrow.
Yeah, Ted is actually, he's always such a warm, friendly character, but he's holding his cards pretty close to the chest in this episode.
Yeah, so it must be...
He's getting savvier.
I hope the writers haven't oversold it, but it must be an amazing plan, and it must be, something pretty compelling for Ted to be on board. And of course, because Eden let Santana get past Gina to see Brandon earlier, Gina casually likes to rub it in that Santana's been seeing a lot of crews lately. But that was a nice, brief but nice scene between Eden and Gina. Lionel tells Augusta that Brick is the son he had with Sophia. And it actually, the information got relayed fairly quickly, her initial confusion, and then, it was a baby swap. And she just buys into it very quickly, doesn't comment on, that sounds like something Minx would do. Or does it sound... if you think about it, Augusta would probably think, I'd do the same thing. But it immediately goes into, talk about how, this is just bringing you closer together. Lionel says, well, if it helps, I've lost Brandon, so that's not a tie now. But that doesn't change her mind about leaving him. He says, don't you miss it? And she says, when you have to live in Sparta, you try not to think of Troy. She tells him to expect divorce papers from Julia.
She actually took the whole thing better than I would have expected. In fact, I would say Warren is probably more upset, interestingly, than Augusta.
But in a way, because it lines up a lot with suspicions she had. She had suspected he might be Lionel's son, though not the exact way, and suspected that it was some, familial relationship to Minx that would explain why she was doing all this. So other than the fact that some things clicked into place, I think it's largely what she expected in the first place.
Yeah, I think so too. I think she's glad actually to have an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. That as you say, clicks into what she's already suspected in one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. But she just walks out. We don't know where Augusta's living. She might still be at the Capwell Hotel. We haven't seen this new apartment with Julia yet. Also, it occurred to me, where's Breeze? Is he allowed in the? Is he living in the Capwell Hotel, or she? So, and that reminds me of another character we haven't seen for about 3 weeks. A brand new character that was introduced that needs a lot of care and feeding. I assume Ruben is feeding Bryony in behind the scenes.
Bryony, that's right.
Because Kelly Capwell certainly hasn't been shown in any way, caring for her new dog. That reminds her of her old dog. I can just imagine it showing up on Sally's door with a note from Kelly saying, "Oh, hi, Sally, I don't have time to take care of this dog myself, so here, you can take care of it in your apartment down by the sea that I made you move into." And you have to still call it Bryony, though. That's what I'm picturing. So yeah, Breeze and Bryony off somewhere. Lionel goes over to tell Sophia that it didn't go well with Augusta, and he invites her on a drive up the coast. Seems to be just as friends still. And I think she's thinking of going. She then goes to Cece and says that she's going to cut herself loose from him now because she doesn't want to deal with the pain of being rejected by him when he wakes up.
Yeah.
So I think that actually makes good sense. So I imagine we'll see her moving out of the guest house tomorrow, or starting the thing. I don't know. She might not get enough time because of if Cece, reveals himself tomorrow. And in fact, if she's going up the coast with Lionel, she might not even be at Mason's party. Although she had a voting, didn't she have some voting shares or something? So she might be expected. She might be expected to be there. We'll see. We'll see if she gets kicked out before she can move out on her own. Now, this is interesting because in the very next scene, Sophia arrives at the Capwell house to say she's going to visit Cece. And we think that they must have swapped these two scenes around, that the scene of Sophia with Cece was moved earlier in the episode. But really it probably should have come at the end of the next act, or however they break these things up. Yeah, it was sort of a weird sudden. Yeah, but it was so quick, because Eden opens the door, then Sophia walks in and walks upstairs, and then I think that was when Santana showed up right after that, and that's how that scene continued. So I think a week or two we had a weird thing where something seemed to be out of order too. So maybe they just thought ending on maybe there's too much CC scenes bunched together, or even the break with the breaks were too far apart and they needed a shorter scene or something. Gina coaches Brandon to go in and tell a sleeping CC how much he loves him. And of course, after Brandon leaves, CC opens his eye and says he doesn't buy it.
No.
No, he wanted to come in here. Oh yeah, did he want to dress in a suit and tie too? Is that his idea?
Now, I was kind of intrigued by that because I wondered how he knew that Brandon was in a suit and tie, because of course he's pretending to be in a coma, so his eyes are not actually open.
I think maybe he does this and he peers a little bit.
Yeah,
he did
must.
That. Seemed to do that in a later scene. So
he seems to know a lot about what is going on in the room visually as well. So he must do something like that.
To Gina's protestations, he says, "You are never so morally outraged as when someone sees you for what you are."
I thought that was a great line because that's so true. And in this iteration of Gina, she's got a way of kind of making her voice quiver a little bit and getting very accusatory when someone has caught her doing exactly what she's doing.
And she seems to be doing a little more things. Like the previous Gina, I think almost everything she did was defensive.
Yeah.
But it seems like Gina now is actively picking at at things.
This is a more aggressive Gina.
Yeah, because there's a line coming up later that I can't see the previous Gina saying, but Gina tells Cece that the family needs him. She's trying to pretend she's still his loving wife, and reminds him how much she really loved him. And he, of course, says, he doesn't believe that. And she says, well, the only reason I covered up that Mason raped me is in order to keep your stress levels low, because, I thought you might kill Mason after what you had done to Lionel. Of course, Cece doesn't buy any of that, and he also says he wishes he had killed Lionel. Mm-hmm. So he's still just as angry as before. Now, if he were awake, his doctor would tell him, now, in order to avoid a second heart attack, you've got to, cut out all this anger. But he seems to have woken up refreshed and angry as ever. I guess it's like a smoker who starts smoking the day after his lung transplant. He tells Gina to find out what Mason's planning at that reception tomorrow. Now, this actually happens quite earlier in the episode, and the whole episode deals with various people trying to figure out what is going on tomorrow. He says, that's when I will change all their lives forever. So he's got big plans, too.
And it'll be really interesting. I'm hoping Mason will get to present his plan. And it'll be interesting if he does to see Cece's reaction. And I guess with Cece awake, he's now in charge, I assume.
We'll be seeing Cece hiding behind a pillar in his tuxedo, ready to pounce, just waiting.
And I'm wondering if it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Will Cece be, in such a fit that he's just going to discard anything Mason proposes, which could perhaps lead to a split if some of the others think that it is a really good plan? Or will he maybe try and adapt parts of Mason's plan, but kind of shuffle Mason out? Will that lead to a whole other new cycle of revenge? It'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Because, Cece will get his own vote back.
Yeah.
Presumably he might even get Brandon's vote back. And if the others all vote against him in favor of Mason, he actually could be out of his own company. It depends how angry he is with everyone. He have maybe overplayed his power.
Yeah.
Not be whatever secret thing Mason signed. That might actually be something Cece hasn't expected, and that will actually make it impossible for him to regain control. So Gina tries to get Ted to tell her what Mason's planning. He's really the only one who knows. And he says, well, it's a family matter. And Gina says, I'm family. You don't consider me an outsider. He says, in terms of running the business, yeah. So he's pretty diplomatic about that and laid back and carefree, as Ted always is. And Gina says, why don't you just drop dead? So this is what I was saying about, after their time in the tunnels with what's his name, Gina and Ted actually had a good relationship. So I wouldn't have seen Linda Gibney's Gina snapping at Ted like that. I would have seen her being annoyed at not getting the info, but telling him to drop dead, her only ally really in the family, I think is surprisingly extreme.
I think if the first Gina had delivered this line, it would have been delivered in a very different way, sort of perhaps half crying out of apparent desperation.
She maybe even walked
walk
towards the camera a bit to imply Ted couldn't hear her.
Yeah, it would come from a more, I think, vulnerable seeming place and would appear to be more
exasperated than spiteful.
Exasperated, and maybe, using that because the first iteration used a lot of that idea of being vulnerable in her manipulations. So she would use that line, I think, to show how vulnerable and desperate she is, and then try and use that further. Whereas this version of Gina is a lot tougher. So I think it could have been used by the first one, but in a very different way.
Yeah, it's interesting. The writers have already started veering the character a bit, and maybe during the recasting phase, they thought, okay, how are we gonna turn Gina in the coming year, and let's cast towards that to make it do half the work in the casting of making someone, like with the new CC recasting.
Well, also I think when they find an actress they like, and I think this actress stays with the show for quite a while, that maybe they see different potential in the character than they might not have seen with another actress. I think actors bring a certain amount to a role as well.
Like a reverse Joe Perkins.
Yeah.
Like, oh, now we have a dud. Let's just kill him off. That's probably what happened on Another World with all these Sallys over the years. They got a dud and killed her off. Gina tells Cece about Santana, not realizing that Kirk's in the room. For a small room with a big window, there were surprisingly many shadows for Kirk to hide in. They lit it slightly differently today. So she's like blurting things out to Cece, and she, I guess, first realizes Cece is not responding, but then almost immediately Kirk says, "What, do you think he's going to answer you back?" So she said, "Oh, I just hate Santana so much, I had to get it out, to someone." And Kirk says, "You waste a lot of energy hating people." That's true of both Ginas. Cece then tells Gina to be more careful. It's only one more day, but Gina asks Cece what Kirk was doing in his room, and Cece says, "Paying me a respectful visit." So this is interesting. I don't know if he was just needling Gina, or if just Kirk has locked out, and every time, Cece has overheard him, he's just happens to be saying the right things, and Cece actually thinks, here's someone who loves my daughter, and he's doing great things for my business, and he's probably the only person I could count on that's not a family member. He's Jack Lee's son.
Well, if that happens, that'll definitely set up some very interesting family dynamics, because absolutely no one else sees Kirk that way, including Eden. So.
Yeah, that would be actually kind of funny if Kirk ends up as Cece's right-hand man after everything drops.
I have to say, two of the characters I'm enjoying most in scenes together are Gina and Kirk. I always enjoy it as soon as they're in a scene together, because they're like two scorpions in a bottle, basically. They understand each other. They're both coming to the fight with whatever ammunition they have, and they'll be allies, but then they will turn on each other at a second's notice if that gets them a little further up the ladder as well.
It's like the scorpion and the frog, but with two scorpions.
Yeah.
Gina says that Cece's taking a big risk trying on his tuxedo, because anyone could walk in. I mean, the door's locked, but still. Cece wanted to make sure it fit, and he's got a little cane. And he ends the episode by saying, "I didn't have time to get Christmas presents, so tomorrow night I'll parcel out destinies." So
this Cece continues the tradition of being a bit of a megalomaniac, having a bit of a god complex. So we'll see how godlike he actually is when he stumbles into Mason's party in a tuxedo.
Must have inherited that from his father. So. "I'll be parceling out destinies. Even one for you," he says to Gina.
Yes.
I mean, Gina's got to be... Maybe that's why she snapped at Ted, because this has got to be freaking her out that Cece's awake. She's doing everything he can just in hopes that it'll be enough to keep him from basically sending her to jail and taking Brandon just out of spite, which he could easily probably do. Especially, he's still Brandon's legal father, right? So if he sends her away, signs over Brandon to Santana, because now he doesn't have any use for Brandon except to spite Gina, and might get Santana out of his hair a bit too. Things could go very badly for Gina in the coming tomorrow. A lot of people might be packing their bags tomorrow. Now, this is a Wednesday episode, so I think they might drag it out till Friday before we see the reveal. So Thursday episode might still be the end of this same day, or it might be the morning of the day of Mason's party. But I don't think we'll see the CC reveal himself until at least Friday, maybe as the cliffhanger. But then again, there's another possibility. What if Cece sees Mason's plan and maybe the person that Mason's working with and chooses not to reveal himself because he thinks, oh, shoot, I got to do some more behind-the-scenes stuff to undo this before I reveal myself. That's something that just came to me. So,
Or to take advantage of it, but also make sure he retains the power.
the bonus is more episodes of Gina kowtowing to Cece in the hopes that it will spare her. So that is it for episode 373. And we're in mid-January. So we will be back after we watched episode 374. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
When you have to live in Sparta, you try not to think of Troy.
Welcome back.
Hello.
It's January 16th, 1986, Thursday, episode 374. And we actually watched this last night on January 16th, 2022, exactly 36 years after it aired. So we are once again in sync with the real date, which we haven't been since the first month or so. When we started, we were 35 years behind. So we'll see how many days we can keep that up before we start to lag again. We're only, airing one episode every 2 weeks with the extras alternating, so it shouldn't be too hard to keep up at this slower pace. We accelerated a bit so that we could line up with Christmas and New Year last year, which was kind of fun. So we'll be doing that again in 2023. Nick wants Kelly to tell him what's wrong. She goes to Sophia and says that she slept with Dylan. Sophia says she needs to figure out whether it was really an accident. So Kelly tells Nick she's going to New York to think before she answers his questions. He says he won't let her go. He wants to know now. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think she'll decide that she really wanted to sleep with Nick the whole time? I mean, with Dylan the whole time?
I think she will, but I still feel like we're going to have at least the preamble to a February wedding. So
That's true. They need to get more ahead in the planning before things fall apart.
Yeah, so, and I'm still expecting possibly some kind of big moment where she changes her mind, while she's at the altar or something like that. So, I'm kind of feeling like maybe they'll squabble about this a little bit more, and I don't think she'll cancel the wedding, because I think we need that for the sweeps.
Mm-hmm. It was nice that once she did decide to go to Sophia, she blurted it out right at the beginning instead of dragging things out. So at least she's told someone. Although, probably Mason and Eden suspect. Cruz and Santana wonder about all the death in Gina's script. Cruz, of course, confirms there is no such car. Cece listens in on the extension as Cruz invites Gina to meet him at the gazebo. Where he plays her a tape of him reading her script, which flusters her, but she claims not to know anything about the script that was found in her room. And just as Cruz is about to push the issue, Kirk shows up out of nowhere and says, "Oh, Gina, you wrote that script for that correspondence school marketing course that you were taking." No, was it marketing?
It was advertising.
Advertising course that you were taking. Remember? You ran it by me and I thought it was too dark, so you scrapped it. She said, "Oh yeah, I forgot. I must have thrown it in that drawer and not thought about it twice." She doesn't really push Cruz on the fact that Santana searched her room illegally at this point. But once again, Kirk shows up with a surprise announcement that saves the day.
Yes, although I don't think he's being sort of quite as clever as he thinks, because I think it would be really quite easy for Cruz to check on who was, registered for an advertising course. So I think it's easy to show that that's
spur of the moment.
Yeah, but I think if he does some investigating, he'll find that there's nothing that corresponds with that story. And what he's shown is that he's in collusion with Gina, whatever this is. So,
it's not quite as good as the Muddy Footprints story from a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Over dinner, Cruz tells Santana that he thinks Gina and Kirk are working together. So just as you said, this is now actually linked the two in Cruz's mind. Santana complains that he seems to be thinking about Eden during their dinner, but he says he's actually thinking about the tape. She says, well, why don't you do that over the dessert instead? I spent less time on it. And they kiss. Kirk tells Gina that Eden told him she heard a man's voice begging to die that night. So he knows exactly what that script was, exactly what she did, and says, I hope you did a better job destroying the tape than you did destroying that script. So they are, I think, definitely 100% in cahoots at this point.
Yeah.
Cruz and Eden make small talk at the gazebo, while Cece watches them from his room. And he says to Gina, it's weird, they were engaged when I went to sleep, and now she's married to Kirk when I wake up. And Gina says, oh yeah, they broke up right after, Cece says, after someone disconnected my life support system? After the plug was pulled? Gina says, you know about that? It's a really good Robin Matson delivery on that. You know about that? Cece tells Gina to make sure there's an extra plate set for Mason's dinner. So Cece does not reveal how conscious he was and how aware he was of who exactly pulled his plug, if he actually thinks it was Gina or if he knows everything, in which case all of Kirk's evidence against Gina is basically worthless, because if Cece already knows everything, Kirk doesn't really have anything on her. So I think Kirk better move quickly to get her to do something for him, whatever his plan is, while he still has that to hold over her.
Yeah, this could really disrupt not only his leverage with Gina, but of course, ultimately his marriage to Eden as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what he could do to shore up that marriage.
And also any foothold he's hoping to get with Capwell Enterprises, because we haven't seen him with CC. I mean, they didn't really know each other at all before CC went into his coma. So we don't know how he might have been planning to play CC.
Even if CC knows it was Gina, he may not realize Kirk's role in, he may believe that Kirk truly did what he did just to save Eden, not being aware that Gina is the one who pulled the plug. So Kirk still might come out looking okay in Cece's eyes.
Yeah.
Cece listens to Eden and Kirk talking about tonight's vote. Eden says she did make some mistake, but Kirk says that the overall company is going up. Even Wall Street says so. So he says he won't let Mason take over the company. It's all fodder for Cece. New dining room! We've got a beautiful, big dining room. That must be one of those two rooms off to the right. We've been in the living room quite often, where the Christmas tree was over Christmas, but that's actually a relatively small room. This dining room is huge. There's a big dining room table in the middle. Different decorating style, I think, than the rest of the house, really.
Yes, I think this new set is definitely much more worthy of what we would assume a multi-millionaire, probably be a billionaire in today's dollar, family would have, rather than the little wicker dining set we usually see. So this is more appropriate for someone of the Capwell status.
Cece once said his grandfather built that house, so that's probably one reason why he may be keeping that atrium style, because that was probably the centerpiece when the house was built. But yeah, their living room, it's very 80s compared to the the atrium, but still not very opulent. Mason is directing some delivery guy. I don't know if it's the same guy who we see as a waiter later. It might be the same guy, to bring everything to Rosa in the kitchen. Of course, Gina has said to Cece she'll tell Rosa to set an extra plate. And a lot of people talk about Rosa today, but we don't actually see her.
No.
The server sets the table, and Mason notices the extra plate that Gina had added. But she claims that she thought he had miscounted, and she doesn't really push back when Mason has the server remove the extra plate. So I don't know why she didn't go with the excuse that Cece fed her, like, oh, tell him you want your lawyer there, or your lover. Having her lawyer there would make so much sense because she does have the voting, Brandon's voting shares and Cece's, right?
Yeah, this way Mason just gets rid of the place setting, and now when it magically appears again, she'll have to come up with an explanation again, assuming
I'm wondering if she's planning to duck out before that happens. And didn't she book a trip to Brazil a while back?
Yes,
Maybe.
she did at one
So
point.
maybe she thinks, oh, Cece can sit in my spot because I'm not even going to be here. Kirk and Eden pop in briefly, and Mason reminds them it's black tie, and Eden says, I'll be wearing mine. Reminds me of a scene from a few years from now where we see Eden in a tuxedo with a black tie.
It reminded me of Kirk in that little dressing gown, which we both found a bit feminine for him. So.
Well, his wife will be wearing the tie in the family. Kirk tells Eden he has plans to thwart Mason. So this follows up from that slight hint he made earlier about not letting Mason get away with this. But I can't imagine what Kirk's plan is.
Also, since he doesn't know Mason's plans, you have to wonder how effective Kirk's plans would be. I mean, his plans, whatever they would be, would only be able to extend to Mason not being able to take over the company. It wouldn't extend to any of the other stuff he's been working on.
Unless he's planning to call in a bomb threat just to thwart the dinner. But as far as we know, all those documents have been signed and probably filed. So I think whatever's Mason's done, I think it's done. As they are getting dressed, Kirk can't find his cufflinks and looks through all the doors and tries to open the drawer where Eden has hidden the letter she wrote to Cruz, which, conveniently for viewers who may have missed it, she was reading at the start of the episode to herself. And she won't let him open it, and he asks, are you hiding something from me?
Yes, she is.
I don't feel that's going to go very far, maybe today, but he may follow up on breaking into that on his own in a future episode.
Yeah, it's not really a foolproof kind of thing. He can just jimmy open the lock or something, and he'll see she's still in love with Cruz, which probably shouldn't be a huge surprise to Kirk. So,
I mean, actually, ideally, he should probably excuse himself from the dinner table, sneak up and jimmy it before he has a chance to swap things around after the dinner. In Cece's room, Ted and Mason discuss whether Ted is still going to vote for Mason, because Eden's had a lot of time to talk to Ted, and Mason's a bit worried. Mason assures him that this is what Cece would want, and Ted says that he never saw eye to eye with that, and he says, well, in business, we always agreed. He usually didn't even have to tell me what to do. But I'm not doing this for Cece, I'm doing this for myself.
It'll be really interesting to see what Cece does think of Mason's idea. We don't know what he's been doing puttering around up there. We know he has access to a phone. Maybe he's actually been making some phone calls anonymously to try and figure out what's going on. It's possible.
Mason later finds the door to Cece's room is locked. He has no way of knowing that Cece locked it from the inside. And the guard is missing. When the guard returns from his break, Mason returns again and finds the door is now unlocked. And the guard suggests, well, maybe the nurse was in there the first time he came, and then while we were both gone, she left. So Mason tells the guard, do not let anyone into or out of this room for the rest of the night. Now, this may be problematic for Cece. Mason checks in on Cece, and he's got his covers all the way up to his neck, and Mason sort of straightens them. But after Mason leaves, we see that's because he's got his tuxedo on underneath. He throws the covers off, and he's ready to go. So he's just got to get past that guard. But I don't think that guard is going to follow through with Mason's order. If Cece comes back to life and orders him to stand down. He's not a very effective guard, really, so far.
No.
I mean, we've seen, for the last 2 or 3 episodes, we haven't even seen the guard, and we've seen a lot of people in that room, especially Gina, several times with the door locked, which was probably Mason's main reason for hiring the guard. So I don't know how they've been getting past the guard so thoroughly. Maybe Cece phones her and says, oh, the guard's just gone. Quick, come back up. And then she gets in again. Maybe she's got a spare key made. So yes, Cece's ready to go, and presumably he won't wait till the end of the episode, but maybe he'll have an argument with the guard upstairs for half the episode while people downstairs are revealing things.
Yeah, I sort of suspect we might see a whole episode of CC perhaps trying to sneak past the guard or something like that, and it kind of building up to him making his appearance at the end.
I mean, hopefully it doesn't collapse or something and go back into a coma. That would be anticlimactic.
That would be a bit
The way I think we all want to see CC walking into that new
Wouldn't
dining room.
Seem to be worthy of a recast if they just stick him back into a coma.
And that is it for episode 374. We'll be back after we watch episode 375. See you then.
Bye-bye.
We've watched the last episode of week 77, Friday, January 17th, 1986. And we watched it Monday, January 17th, 2022. 2022. Episode number 375. Kelly tells Sophia that she's going to New York to think things over. And Sophia says, I think you should reconsider that. So I think she thinks Kelly's plan is a little more excessive than what she'd had in mind.
Mind you, I have to admit, I found Sophia's advice to Kelly this episode a bit confusing because she kept saying, take your time, go and think it over, but she wasn't really as into her going as far as going to New York. So,
I think maybe she thought that would seem bad to Nick.
Yeah, which
it did.
It did.
Dylan is interviewing casino workers at Buzz's. Augusta arrives, saying she could deal cards, do reservations, social planning, or anything. She demonstrates her card skills with some of the Buzz patrons. Dylan says she's too sophisticated for the casino. There goes our dream of the entire cast working at the casino.
So we know now that this is going to be not a very classy casino. This is going to be kind of a slimy casino.
Well, he did say you're welcome to come back as a patron. Lionel arrives and tells her to come back to him. And she says, I need money. And he says, well, you're going to get a lot in the divorce, so I don't think you need to work. She says that she thinks that he's going up the coast with Sophia. You're off to Carmel with your barefoot contessa. Lionel refuses to confirm. So Augusta phones Sophia and says, hey, I want to meet you tomorrow. And Sophia says, oh, I'm going out of town tomorrow. So basically confirms the whole thing for Augusta.
Yeah, and I thought that Lionel's argument was a bit odd because we know he's kind of doing all this stuff with Sophia, and he's given Sophia this portrait. He had a big unveiling of it at the art gallery, and yet he's also pursuing Augusta. So I could see why Augusta wasn't entirely convinced by all this.
Nick arrives at Sally's place, demanding to know where Dylan is. Sam tells him he's at Buzz's. Nick goes over there and grabs Dylan by the collar, demanding to know what's going on between him and Kelly. But thanks to Sam and Cruz arriving in time, he never gets around to it. Dylan tells Sam that he slept with Kelly in Santa Rosa. Sam tells Dylan that Kelly's going to New York, so Dylan decides to go to the Capwell mansion to talk to Kelly. He sure likes to do the wrong thing all the time.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting, too, that Sam was so concerned about Nick confronting Dylan that he got on the phone and phoned Cruz. And I just thought that level of urgency was a little bit over the top, especially when we've seen situations in the past where characters are being kidnapped or whatever, and it takes a while for people to notice. So I
think maybe Sam's just been sensing things building, although it's clear he didn't quite know what had happened between Dylan and Kelly. While kissing Santana, Cruz thinks about Eden. Santana doesn't mind that much. She says it'll take you a little time to stop thinking about her.
I did think
she's willing to plow ahead.
She is. She's very, she's very committed to this idea of being with Cruz. I did think Cruz seemed quite almost, I don't know if eager is the right word, but quite willing to be pulled away from Santana throughout this episode.
Cruz gets the call from Sam, and he runs off. But he tells Santana, you can stay here if you want. Nick tells Cruz that he thinks something's going on between Kelly and Dylan. Cruz thinks he's getting paranoid like before. But then Nick tells him all the little hints that he seems to have noticed. And then Cruz says, well, don't make the same mistake I made and wait too long. You should go after Kelly right now before she goes to New York. So Nick heads over to the Capwell mansion to confront Kelly.
And I was actually a little confused at the end of this scene because I sort of thought that they had agreed that Cruz would go with him, but Cruz actually ended up going back to Santana.
Mm-hmm. And she's waiting for him on the floor. She hangs up after, while calling her mother when Cruz comes back. So once again, Rosa's not in the episode, but a few times she's mentioned. So Anyway, they kind of pick up where they left off on the floor of the beach house. Shirts are unbuttoned as the end of the episode approaches. Kirk is very angry with Eden for not letting him look in that dresser drawer. He says, oh, I don't like you keeping secrets from me. And she says, I'm not. I just don't want you to know some things. Something like that. Kind of bizarre.
And she sort of says, why don't you get some secrets too? We'll keep secrets from
Do you have any
other.
secrets? She says, no. I'm like, oh, okay. Just the ones we know about. Mason tells the guard not to let anyone in or out of Cece's room. So Cece knocks over a chair, causing the guard to run in, and then Cece brains him with his cane. He says, sorry, young fella.
I think we're already seeing a more action-oriented CC than the previous version, because I can't quite imagine the Charles Bateman version doing that.
Mm-hmm. So he makes it downstairs. I was worried he was going to fall down the stairs for a minute there with his cane, because I don't think there's a proper banister on there. It's a health and safety issue there. But he does not at any point barge in to the dinner. He decides to stay outside and listen for much of the events. Whenever someone goes in and out, he hides behind a potted plant.
Yeah,
so
very
that was a twist. And that extra plate that Gina had set wasn't really in play. And speaking of Gina, she's not in this episode. She fails to turn up to the dinner. And this may be exactly what I thought. Maybe she realizes that once, Cece reveals himself, she's not long for this world. She might have taken that trip to Brazil.
Maybe with Brandon?
Maybe. We don't know where Brandon is either.
Yeah, but we do know that they have given Mason their votes.
Well, he had Brandon's vote anyway, didn't he?
I think so, but, that's confirmed. I mean, she didn't snatch it away or something.
Yeah, I don't remember what vote she has. I guess she has Cece's vote. I don't know.
Because I'm pretty sure at the thing, which we'll talk about when they're tallying the votes, I think he mentioned...
Well, he says I have Dad's and Brandon's votes, but it's not clear that that's through... No, Brandon has 2 votes, his and Channing's. And Mason says he has them, so I assume that means Mason has control of them, not Gina. Mason drags out the evening by having a Baroque trio play, a clarinet, a flute, and a guitar. Eden wants him to get on with it and serve dinner. Mason says, well, the eastern branch of the Capwell family are devoted to arts and culture. So this is, I think, maybe the second reference we've heard to the Capwells originally coming from back east. And we do know there's those cousins in the Bahamas or whatever it was that, Kelly went to visit that time. So this might be a third, the third group. Don't know if we'll ever see those. It's kind of a bit like Dark Shadows, who's going to show up at the door and be a vampire. Mason delays serving the dinner a little longer in the hopes that Gina will arrive, and finally Eden has had enough. So Mason reveals his plan. He shows graphs and charts showing that the companies that ship Capwell oil are making 5 times as much of it from it as Capwell Enterprises is. And Eden mentions that for years Cece has tried to buy some tanker ships but was unsuccessful. And Mason says, but I haven't bought any. I've made a deal to merge with one of the tanker companies. And then he shows that their profits will quadruple in just a couple of years. But they will only sign the deal if Mason is made CEO of Capwell Enterprises. So Ted votes for Mason. Kelly never gets around to voting, but she's clearly annoyed with Ted, and Eden storms off. So Mason has enough votes with Brandon, his own, Brandon's other one, and Ted. That's 4 votes. Just then, Dylan and Nick arrive. Nick accuses Dylan of going to New York with Kelly. So Kelly, Ted, Sophia, and Mary end up going to the atrium to help with the fuss, leaving just Mason and Kirk in the room. And Mason says, "I'm glad you're here, Kirk. My first job is to demote the 2 of you, and I'll take over Dad's office." Mason proposes a toast, but Kirk decides to leave instead. So Mason is all alone in the dining room, and he toasts to himself. Cece walks in. Mason drops his glass, and Cece says, "Hello, Mason." So not at all how we pictured the big confrontation going, and interestingly enough, things could happen in such a way that only Mason knows Cece's out of his coma. He could still manage to keep things secret from his other family members for more episodes if the logistics work out. Who knows what he'll say to Mason? Will he say, "Good job, son. This is what I've waited for all these years"? Or will he say, "I'm the head of Capwell and none of this is going to go on"?
Well, I thought it was when I was watching this scene of them voting and Mason giving the presentation, I thought, I maybe this is sort of how it goes down in real life in some family-run companies. But I thought it was really interesting that Kelly and Sophia were so negative and so down on Ted for voting for it when everyone agreed that this was actually a good plan. So it seemed to me like they were really showing their dislike or disapproval of Mason at the expense of what might be best for the company.
So this might be how Cece sees it too. And,
that's what I'm thinking. Yeah. And I'm also thinking, I know, it's makes sense that Eden and Kirk, of course, would be quite upset to be deposed, but then again, they didn't come up with the plan, and they have made a lot of mistakes which they have actually acknowledged. So why necessarily would they remain on as CEO if someone has come up with a plan and could potentially do a better job, since they will all profit from it?
And we didn't see hide nor hair of Kirk's plan to stop Mason that he kept touting last episode.
Yeah, so I feel like CC really wanted to see this plan, and I think that's part of the reason why he didn't just burst in dramatically and reveal himself to everyone. I think he wanted to see the plan, and whether he wants Mason to be the head of it or not, or whether he, will want to stop it, maybe watching it he came up with something even better, or whether he wants to perhaps have Mason stay in place and be almost the puppet master behind him. I don't know. That'll be interesting.
He could do a thing like he has done with Gina for the last few days and have Mason, running the company, but he's still pretending he's in a coma. I don't know. Could be fun for a little while longer. The actor's at least out of the bed. He mentioned in his one interview that they were putting some powder in his hair to make it gray for a few days, and they gave up on that eventually. So I think there's still a little bit in there, but it's probably going to be gone pretty soon.
Yeah, so I actually think this shows us CC's, what we've been told about CC over and over again, that he's business first. And I think it was actually very smart for him to actually see what was going on in the company and what direction it might go in. He did not interrupt the vote. I think if he had been really, really upset with what was going on, he might have interrupted.
Yeah, I was expecting him to walk in and say, "I vote no!"
Yeah, exactly.
But it didn't happen.
So I feel like perhaps Mason is right insofar as maybe this is the kind of thing CC would have approved of.
Yeah, we'll see. Will Mason go running to him saying, "Dad, you're awake"?
Yeah, we'll have to see. It definitely gives him a very objective view of how the company is being run in his absence and all of the dynamics, and who's actually thinking of the business side and who's letting sort of the personal stuff get in the way.
And we can't wait to see his opinion of Kirk when it all is revealed. and whether he knows that Gina's the one that pulled the plug.
Well, we've had two things, one of him lying in the bed, and now also if he was listening to the whole meeting, where they have discussed the mistakes that Kirk and Eden have made. So he's very aware of that. Now, whether he agrees those are mistakes or not, and whether, the clashes he has with Mason would in any way override the deep bond he has with Eden. That's another thing to be seen.
Well, we had some credits again. First time since, last week, I guess. We had some in episode 368. They're identical, except Judith McConnell is listed as Sophia Capwell / Armonti instead of Capwell space Armonti. So, similar to a couple of weeks ago when we saw a typo, I guess someone retypes those every time for the credits and maybe decided the / made sense there. So, not really a change in anyone's status at all, just an interesting point. And that's it for the week. Week 77. We'll be back with a Monday, January 20th episode after we watch episode 376 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
The fact that you are going off on our boat to Carmel with your barefoot contessa